and this is the 154th Security Thought Leadership webinar. And we're here every Thursday at this time, where what we do is we examine a topic of relevance to the security world. And the idea of thought leadership is to critique today in order we get a better type of security tomorrow. So we're not trying to solve the world's problems here, just give people thoughts to do. And today's topic is one that's emerged from a number of previous webinars. When is political violence a business problem? And we've been around the edges of this, but now's the day when we're going to tackle it head on. And as always, we've got three experts, actually from different parts of the world: Chicago, Portugal, and Nigeria. And in a minute, I'll be asking each of them to introduce themselves. And when they've done that, as is our way, I will ask each of them to make an opening statement. 3 minutes when they get to say whatever they want to say about the issue. And then after that, I'll give you a chance to join in with some questions and some discussion. So could I encourage you, please, to use the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen, get your questions in early, and we'll endeavour to incorporate it into the ensuing discussion. I'm sure we will. Without further ado then, let's go and meet our panel. And first of all, over in America, Robert. Robert, let's ask you please to introduce yourself.
Thank you. I'm Robert Pape. I'm a professor of political science at the University of Chicago. I've been studying political violence for 30 years, for the last 20 years, especially terrorism around the world. And for the last several years, I've been focusing on collective political violence in the United States, first with the George Floyd protests, and now with the insurrection.
That is interesting, and I'm sure we're going to come to that. Rod, can I ask you to introduce yourself, please?
Yes, certainly. Rod Cowan, long-time journalist in the security field, currently the executive director of CPOST, the Chicago Project on Security and Threats. The simplest way that I find to explain my role is that architect's dream, builder's nightmare. Professor Pape is the architect, I'm the builder.
And you've done quite a bit of building in your time, Rod. Rather well, I might add. Thank you, Rod. And let's go to Lagos and meet Victor. Victor, please introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. My name is Dr. Victor Iwuoha, a senior lecturer, Department of Political Science, University of Nigeria in Nsukka. My research interests straddles across international security, development studies, ethnic crisis, political violence, and so on and so forth. I'm also a part of the editorial team of Springer's journal, Security Journal. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Victor. So three experts, all have written about this topic, actually. So let's go and hear then what they say. 3 minutes when they get to say whatever they want to say about this subject matter. Robert, your opening statement, please.
So political violence has never been more of a business problem than it is today. Business turns fundamentally on property rights. Property rights turns fundamentally on being secured by governments and legitimate ways. Democracy has been our best way to secure property rights. And today, democracy is being tested in major democracies in ways we have not seen in our lifetimes. Most importantly, in the United States, the world's first democracy is now being tested in ways that are a bit more important than in our lifetimes, and this will have consequences for democracies and business around the world. What I've been doing is conducting studies of who broke into the Capitol on January 6th with large research teams at the Chicago Project on Security and Threats. The number one thing that we learned about their demographics is that they are coming from the mainstream. Of the 700 who broke into the Capitol and have been charged with breaking into the Capitol on January 6th, over half are business owners, CEOs, and from white-collar occupations, doctors, lawyers, architects, accountants. They were only 7% unemployed when they broke into the Capitol. This is very different than the profile of right-wing extremists than we're used to seeing, where a third would be unemployed. And also, we wouldn't have categories of business owner and CEO. Further, only about 13% were members of pre-existing militia groups or extremist groups like the Oath Keepers or Proud Boys. The 90% that made the storm a storm were not. And that means they're coming from the core mainstream of America. Further, we've done nationally representative surveys to see what are the sentiments sympathetic with those who broke into the Capitol. And what we've discovered is that the equivalent of 21 million American adults, that's a huge swath of the mainstream of America, 21 million American adults hold two radical beliefs. First, that Joe Biden is an illegitimate president, and second, that the use of force to restore Trump to the White House is justified. Now, this large degree of community support for violence for political purposes is very concerning. Those of us that have studied political violence around the world for years, this is the key metric that we can track. It's the dry brush in a wildfire season that can be touched off by lightning. We can't predict lightning strikes. We can measure the size of the combustible material that can go up. This is really concerning. And also, as you're seeing, we have seen a run on the Reichstag in Germany in 2020. We've also now seen the trucker occupation and insurrection in Canada. What's happening here is most virulent in America right this moment, but that's not to say this problem isn't going to spread, and we're already seeing warning flags. This is a problem for business. Again, business crucially depends on property rights, and property rights crucially depends on their legitimately being adjudicated in a fair way. Democracy has been our best way to do that. And this is now at risk, and this is very important for businesses.
Robert, thank you so much. How interesting. And of course, plenty there we can come back to. Don't forget, if you've got a question, use the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen. And as soon as we heard from the panelists, we'll come back to you. So try and get those questions in early, if you will. From the Chicago to Portugal. Rod, your opening statement, please.
I come at it from a slightly different angle. I, of course, worked with Professor Pape and conducted, I think, something like 42 focus groups into the thinking behind what these people are thinking, what is driving them to these beliefs. But what I like to look at is, unlike you, Martin, when you say you're not here trying to solve the world problems here, I am. I'd like to solve the world problems. And one of the ways in doing that is by putting academics together with business people, together with government people. Until we have that three-legged stool in place, then we're not going to advance very far. So we need to start saying, well, how can we get these people working together? And we've run a number of projects that have done precisely that. I think that one of the major problems there is the attitude of security managers. Many of them have security manager as their title, but in fact, they're nothing more than security supervisors. I remember talking to a security manager for a major international bank in Sydney. And I was talking about something that's happened in Afghanistan at the time, and he said he wasn't really interested in that. And it threw me, because I thought, well, if you're part of an international bank, aren't you interested in what's happening in global politics? And he said, no, our job is to stop people getting through the door and stealing stuff off people's desks. Well, 2 weeks after that, 2 of his members of staff were caught up in a siege from an Islamic terrorist in Sydney. And they were caught completely on the hop. After, the bank called me in to talk to them about the problem with things like social media and open source intelligence and what they can do about it. And one of the things that came out was when that incident happened, they were flooded with phone calls from all over the world, and they were not prepared for that. But of course, they're an international bank and they employ people who have families all over the world. So that's just one small example as to why you need to understand political violence. Another aspect is the business owners that were arrested for the January 6th attack. They actually found that they lost 50% of their business for being arrested for participating in that particular event. Well, the same could happen if your bosses or your employees are actually part of an event like that. It could hit your bottom line. So what I'd like to see is people in security to see this more as an opportunity to move away from security supervision into the area of security leadership, so that they can turn around and say to their bosses, say to their local business groups, this is what's happening, this is what it means for our business, and importantly, this is what it means for our society. So that three-legged stool, joining together, academe, business and government, absolutely vital. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you very much indeed, Ross. Some other points we can come back to and discuss during the discussion. Lots of people asking questions already. Do get your questions in, use the question and answer button, and we'll endeavour to put them to the panel as soon as we've heard from Victor. Victor, please, your opening statement. Victor, can you hear me?
Thank you very much.
Victor, I'm so sorry.
I would simply say that
carry on.
I'll simply say that it's about time we die. Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you.
Victor, you're going a bit. You're going a little bit. Just try one more time. See if we can hear you. Victor, I'm so sorry. We can't hear you. I'm going to ask in the background, Sarah, who's on our technology, to liaise with you and see if we can bring you back on board, because we want to hear what you've got to say, but we can't. The connection's too bad to make sense of it. So while Sarah talks to you, Victor, in the background, let me put the first question. So perhaps I could start with you, Robert. Dennis Shep, a former panelist, Robert, from Canada, has said about the trucker protest. You yourself mentioned this, Robert, in your opening statements. And is this an example of how protest plans have innovated new ways to disrupt society? I mean, I suppose in a way what happened in January in America was a slightly new way, or perhaps it's an old way in a modern form, but different ways of rebelling. And Dennis's point, not just about vaccinations, there's more to it than that. There's this issue of protest gaining prominence. Robert, is that true? And I'll come to you, and then I'll come to Rod afterwards.
So we've always had protests for the last 150 years, certainly in democracies, and we've also had sit-ins. What's unusual about what's happening in Canada is the massive nature of effectively the sit-in in Ottawa, which has spread also to some other parts, other cities, and also some of the border regions. And this is really quite large here to really shut down the capital city of Ottawa, of Canada, to the point where we have Trudeau leaving, so people are even somewhat concerned about what could possibly happen in terms of escalation. So this really is coming to, it's sort of an old form, but brought in sort of mass, a new mass area. Now, the key thing to note, though, is this is different from January 6th in the United States. The purpose of January 6th wasn't to occupy the Capitol, it was to stop the transfer of power from a duly elected president who won in a legitimate election, Joe Biden, to the loser, Donald Trump. So the whole point was to keep the loser in office. That's not what's happened here in Ottawa. So we do want to keep in mind that the January 6th is by far the more serious problem, because and for business as well, and it's a problem for people in Canada as well, because if the United States Constitution is broken to the point where we cannot have a transfer of power, what makes anybody think that their business rights and the rights of their income are not going to be seized? We can all sort of put our head in the sand, but this is a very serious issue, because the transfer of power to the president, that is the most precious value. But there are property rights are right underneath that. And we have to be concerned about, we've seen what happened in Russia, where Russia oligarchs have basically taken property from businesses. Well, we don't want to go down that road, but it starts with preventing the transfer of power from a legitimate election.
Okay, Rod, just your thoughts on that topic. I mean, particularly this point about whether this form of protest is going to gain momentum. As an example, we've got it in the UK as well, in a slightly different way, with roads being blocked and businesses being disrupted in central London. As obviously protest has been traditional, it's always existed and not a bad thing. But this is slightly different, Rod. Do you sense this is different?
I sense it is an extension of what's been going on generally with demagoguery around the world. I think we're seeing a rise we've seen these ideas go from viral to violence. We're starting to see violent populism becoming more and more prominent. Now, that's been accelerated by a number of things, not just Brexit and so on, but things like the pandemic, where people are under a lot of pressure anyway, are starting to feel that you know, things are just not right. And that's certainly the sense I've got from the focus groups. People are just saying things are not right. They don't have answers, but they know it's not right. They not necessarily know how to fix it. On a practical level, again, going back to the example I used of a security manager being totally politically unaware, that had he been more politically aware, then he would have been better equipped to deal with the situation. And I just wonder how many security managers have wargamed this scenario of a blockade on their city and what it means to their business. Now, I guarantee quite a few security managers are now developing those plans, but it'd be interesting to do a bit of research, Martin, to find out how many had them before there was an actual blockade. And did they learn from places like France, where these blockades occurred when taxi drivers were objecting to Uber coming into Paris? So it's not like we're getting hit without precedents. If people were just a little bit more of politically aware, then they would be able to respond in a much more sensible and much more organized way. But if you're just sticking your head in the sand or saying that's not my problem, then you're going to get hit with problems.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to come back to that in a minute because I've got another question on those lines. Victor, you know, what, waiting patiently in the background, Victor. We'd love to hear what you want to say. Do you want to just give it another try?
Yeah.
Oh, that's better.
Yeah, I hope you can hear me now.
Yeah.
Yes. I was actually trying to say that it is time we diversify the conversation on political violence. We really need to understand the factors that fuel political violence. And I can simply say that that is mostly located in the political system. Like Johan Galton talks about the structural violence. And today I want to re-emphasize that the fact that the type of leadership we have at this time, especially in this part of the world, in Africa, is such that perpetrates political violence. You see political violence being perpetrated against non-state actors in terms of policies, being made by the government. Such very, very obnoxious policies that lack human face, policies that are against the people, policies that are against the masses. So when they roll out such policies, you see the effect that comes out of it from the public. That is where you begin to see political violence that is now being targeted against the state, okay, as an act to retaliate what the government is doing, what the government is giving out from the political system to the people. So that is why, like, I'll give you an instance, like in Africa, in recent years, there have been coup d'etats in different countries, in Sudan, in Gabon, starting from 2019 down to 2021 in Mali, and then the recent attempt in 2020, this 2022 in Guinea-Bissau, and a lot of them. Why is political violence on the increase? It's because of the act being perpetrated by the government against the people, and the people tries to respond in terms of protests, in terms of uprising, in terms of carrying acts that affect the government and the states. So, like in Nigeria, recently in October 2021, you saw violent protests. That was because of state actors, what they did against the people, where we had issues of police brutalization, and now people had to take up their issues against the state. And there was a mass protest. In fact, it was almost a movement against the state, And from simple protest of the injustices being perpetrated by the state actors, it led to the demand for change in government. And because government saw that the people are now rising up against them, and that the protest could actually culminate to a coup or something like that. So the government had to clamp down on the people in terms of violent attacks against the public. So what I'm trying to say is that in most cases, the states, perpetrates this violence in such a way that it gets out to the public, and the people now try to respond against, back to the state. That's why you see, political violence. And I will also say that there are different problems that this could create in society. Okay, it could actually drive away investors. Okay, people are afraid now, like Nigeria have always been out there borrowing money because investors are leaving, because countries like China, Nigeria usually runs cap in hand to China to borrow, but now China is saying, no, we cannot borrow you money. So Nigeria is turning to other countries. And that is the effect of political violence, because investors are not, they feel that they are not safe, especially in the extractive industry. Oil companies are leaving because there is insecurity, because there is challenges of political violence, there is insurrection, okay? And recently in the southern part of the country, in southeast Nigeria, you see people trying to protest against the government. You see indigenous people of Biafra, and they have stamped out their feet. They are doing what they call a sit at home. And it's such that every Monday, people do not go out to work. Everywhere is shut down. You could imagine the effect, on businesses. So it is a big problem. And what we are saying is that the government should do something to monitor what they are doing in terms of their policy, so that people will not, respond back in a violent way.
Victor, thank you very much indeed. I'm going to stop you because I wonder if I could just go back to Robert. Robert, I mean, in some ways, what Victor's speaking about is the public rebelling against a lack of democracy. Whereas, of course, the one you described was, I'm not sure it was the opposite, but it was a democratic system that was being usurped by undemocratic behaviour. I mean, I take it these are completely different types of political violence, are they? There's no link between those two.
That's right. We have two different types of political violence occurring, and they're close together, which is why you could think about them as running together, but they're different. One is large-scale mass protests. Those may or may not be violent, but large-scale mass protests, which can shut down economic activity in a city, as Rod said, blockade the city, or at the borders of countries and disrupt business for weeks at a time. That's very important, and it's often connected, people say, to the internet. Really, in the George Floyd protests, it's the mass media. What happened with the George Floyd video is, yes, it was circulated on the internet, but it was also circulated through every mass media outlet, and the mass media outlets also covered the initial protests, amplified them, encouraging more. So we need to really see that now that's type one. Type two was on January 6th, where you didn't just have a crowd come, you had a crowd come, that was stage one, but stage two is that crowd then acted with a particular political purpose, not just to occupy a building, but to overturn an election, which would have caused business disruption for years. Not just during the period of time when protesters were occupying a building, the way sort of we see now in Ottawa. So the blockade is a problem. Much bigger problem is pulling the rug out on property rights. That's when the stock market is that's when you're gonna see not a 5% or 10%, you're gonna see a 30%, 50%. movement here. You're going to see governments trying to, or businesses trying to figure out, well, how can they now curry favor with the people in power who are not there legitimately? This is what's going on in Russia. So, and this is a huge problem. Some businesses can, some businesses can't. And it all turns on, do you have that personal connection to the number one person? And that is a very different world than capitalism, business environment we're used to right now. And so that's really the two different problems, and why business is important in each of them. But I focus more on the second one because that's where the rug really comes out of the businesses, and whole businesses will just go out of business unless they are currying favor with the new, autocrat.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, going to move on at this point. Rod, I'm going to come to you. One of the points you raised about mirrors a comment you and Grant's made, and you has got a specific example about North Mozambique. And but the point is about, in his case, oil companies were deaf and blind to what was going on. And I guess the point is, Rod, that this issue is a criticism of security management globally. And I wonder, and you're a good person to ask this to what extent is this endemic to the way security management has been taught to understand its role, and to what extent is this just a rather minor and unfortunate subset of a bigger, more positive agenda? Rod, how do you characterize it?
Well, firstly, security education is woefully lacking. Many academics, even teaching in the security field, will say, don't bother doing a degree in security management. You'd be better off doing business management. Why bother learning about security? Well, now we're finding out why you should have been learning about security 10 years ago. Now, there are young people coming out of university now with degrees in security management, intelligence, counterterrorism, and stuff like that. So my hope is that going in the future, these people will end up in positions of authority. These young people have spent more time thinking about the implications of political violence than I would suggest most of your security managers in the City of London have. So firstly, education, absolutely critical, and taking it seriously is critical. Secondly, political awareness, understanding what it means, and having that connection, as I say, between academe, business and government. Robert Pape predicted January 6th happening in November last year. You can see him on television saying, this is what's going to happen, and it happened. Okay, it's like the pandemic. There are plenty of people out there that will tell you they knew this was going to happen, but for some reason we were caught in the hot. Now, I think classically that's probably because of politics, and Victor has touched on that. Senator Durbin was quoting Professor Pape's findings to the head of the FBI in the Capitol a couple of weeks ago, and asking the FBI what they were going to do about it. And you sit and you listen to the fact that this is self-employed business people, CEOs, bankers, and he's asking the FBI what he's going to do about it. And my response to him would have been, excuse me, Senator, what are you going to do about it? Because we can only do something when it becomes a crime, but it's politicians that are causing the trouble in the first place. And someone needs to remind politicians that businesses can operate without paying taxes. Governments cannot operate without taxes.
Very interesting observation. Thank you very much indeed. Look, we're going to come back on these issues. Thank you, Rod. I'm going to move on at this point. Victor, I'd like to come to you, and a question from Michael Gibbs. And one of the points he makes is about how disinformation, conspiracy theories, what's going on social media is driving violence against business. And I wonder how we might think about responding to that. I mean, where's the route to thinking differently or encouraging different behavior? Victor, if you wouldn't mind.
Yes, actually, the whole thing boils down to the role of the states. Sometimes you try to control the information out there, because we are in the age of social media. So any act perpetrated against the people will go out there, and people will respond in the way that it will be difficult to control. So how has the state responded to what goes out there, the information that the people have against them, because the people have the information, the people know that the government has not been doing well. The people know that the government has actually shortchanged them. From the policies the government makes, is not been very fair to the people. The people have all the reasons to work against the state, and this normally comes in terms of violence, which is difficult to control. So I think there is need for the government to understand that there is a link between what they do and political violence coming from the public. And now, how do we monitor the effect of the violence being perpetrated out there? And the problem there lies in the fact that nobody takes record of the effects of such violence. Nobody takes note, nobody monitors, nobody gives account of how businesses suffer or what the government does, the policies of the government actions against the people. So I think it is time for us to take account, for us to have a periodic evaluation of the effects of this violence. It can also come in terms of electoral violence. It can also come in terms of religious, ethnic violence. And all these things have always impacted very negatively on businesses. So it is time that we monitor how the policies and what we do at the state level, how it affects the public, the businesses of the people. How do people survive? Now, I must talk about exclusion.
Just very quickly, if you wouldn't mind, Victor, very quickly, so I want to move on if I might. So just make your point about exclusion.
Yes, exclusion. It is good that we understand that whenever there is political exclusion, it can lead to violence, like it is happening in southeastern Nigeria. Okay, when people feel that there is exclusion.
Victor, we've lost you.
Yeah, that's what you're saying.
Then there is bound to be
Victor, I'll tell you what, we're going to have to leave you for a second because we've lost you. You're talking about a point on exclusion.
So the government must correct.
Victor, we can't hear you. We're going in and out. So I'm going to ask Sarah to liaise with you in the background, see if we can get you back, Victor. We lost you when you started talking about exclusion. But bear with us. We'll see if we can get you back. Sarah's in the background going to be contacting you. Let me move on very quickly, though. I want to get a couple more questions in. Let me come to you first then, Robert. Godfrey Hendricks, mentions a point I think that was one of the questions we got in advance, actually, Robert, as well, about this point about polarization, extreme views in the workforce, and I guess here's the point about what's the responsibility on organizations with regards to this. We've got a right within reason to think what we want. How do you begin to manage this? Particularly good to ask you, given the sort of extreme views coming from business owners and managers on some cases.
Well, I think that there's a huge missing piece of information for businesses to manage views within the workforce, is that businesses really don't know, I think, much about the sentiments for violence in the general population. So the nationally representative surveys that I just mentioned to you that CPOST has conducted, well, we're the first to conduct ever surveys on insurrectionist sentiments in the United States. Now, before we did that, there were surveys on like generalized violence and of course on crime and police brutality, but not on sentiments for insurrectionist violence. So that came as a big surprise to our political leaders in the United States to really see those surveys. And that's why it's gotten so much reach inside of the government and inside of the media in the United States. Well, that too is important for businesses because that's the larger context within which they are drawing from. They are drawing from the general population. Now, of course, those nationally representative representative surveys have details. And so we also know we can do more precise analysis of different types of backgrounds of folks and so forth. So this isn't just a broad one single number. We can have much more extent, and that's information that if I were a CEO, man, I would definitely want that. Now, not on its own, I would certainly want information about my own workforce at that point in time, but I know I'm going to be hiring for 5 years, not just for a moment. So I really want to know what's happening in the pool of people I'm drawing from. And that right now is information that could be made available to business leaders and is not. And
could it, Robert? Could it? I mean, I wonder if you, just very quickly, if you do a survey of staff, if you're going to be extreme, you're not going to admit it on a survey, surely?
Well, our nationally representative surveys, we ask the question again, coming back,
I see.
Talking about surveying the staff. That is exactly the problem you point out. My point is that the staff is a reflection of the wider pool the staff is drawn from. And that is something that really can be analyzed. And so we can do much more. There is much more, another way to put it is risk assessment that could be brought to the C-suite level that could really matter, in addition to other pieces of information they already have. And I'm just pointing out the part that's really not there and hasn't been there historically, but could be there in the near term.
It just sounds sort of fairly obvious when you say it. I mean, you listen
but you're not getting it from your own business managers. They're not the kind of folks that can, they don't have the backgrounds to do this particular piece right. And going to your normal risk management firm, that's not what they do either. So this has got to be done with these social science tools that I'm talking about, or it's not going to be done well. It's, and you can't just get the aggregated from other surveys that are already out there. So this is something though that businesses themselves here could really do. Now, of course, it would help to be a Fortune 500 business to have money to pay for this, but nonetheless, that is the case in every business. The bigger the business, the more information they have to become a bigger business.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Before I'm going to come to Victor in a minute, I hope this bit on exclusion. Rod, but shall I get you on this point really? Because this is a biggie, right? This is a biggie about understanding your workforce, particularly, I guess, given some of the comments already made. It does sound a sort of obvious, doesn't it? Know your workforce, know where the issues are, understand what's going on in the environment. I mean, one of the points Simon Chan makes in the questions is about, it's not just a matter of engaging with the leaders in the security sector. We need to get the front line thinking about it and filter ideas upwards. It sounds a massive gap, Rod.
Understanding the demographics of where you're operating is probably something that doesn't occur to a lot of security managers. I know there were some that would think about it, but a lot of them wouldn't. I don't think that most people in America would understand that 50% of the people arrested at the Capitol, over 50% of the people arrested at the Capitol came from counties that Biden won. That's going to be a surprise to some people. So, you know, you think, oh no, we're in a Democratic county, we don't have a problem. I got to tell you, if I was a security manager in a Biden county, I'd be more nervous than I would be if I was in a Trump county, right? So if something's happening politically, you may find some. Now, the other problem is, and Bob can explain this better than I, but Bob, I'm going to bring it back to you. Explain the Great Replacement and the change in the demographics. This is really important, Martin. So let him just have a quick word on this.
Rob, if I could just ask you very brief, so I want to bring Victor back in on that exclusion point, if I might. So if I could ask just a minute, if you wouldn't mind. Robert, no, carry on, Robert. Just one more minute. If you can just answer the point, Robert, and then I'll bring Victor in.
We have analyzed not just the demographics, but the counties that the insurrectionists who broke into the Capitol came from. And this is, as Rod said, striking and crucial for businesses, because businesses work in counties. And so what we discovered was that over half came from counties that Biden comfortably won: San Francisco, Chicago, New York City, Dallas, Houston. The biggest thing the counties, the biggest thing that's special about the counties is not how much vote there was for Trump. The more vote, the less likely was the county to have an insurrectionist. The number one thing about the counties was they were losing white population. That was the biggest predictor of whether a county would have an insurrectionist. This is the kind of very granular information I'm referring to that we can access through our nationally representative surveys, our detailed analyses. That is, again, it's demographic information. If businesses want to know about the demographics of who is they're drawing from, this is possible, but it requires a new way to think and a new set of tools. They're available, but they have to be brought into the business.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much indeed. Victor, I'm so keen to see if we've got you back. And you were just about to talk about this point on exclusion. And Victor, one of the questions we got in advance was about this very issue, about the whole issue of exclusion and the context of violence and the reasons why people get involved, business owner or not, is some sense of feeling excluded. Victor, you were about to make a comment on that.
Yes, I was talking about political exclusion. When people are excluded from benefiting from the national cake, for instance, in the extractive industry, who are given the mining rights to mine oil? Which companies are being admitted in the oil industry? These are important questions. Okay, which actors dominate the oil economy? These are important questions. Do we have transparency? So you see that there is lack of transparency. The bidding process is not very transparent enough. All these things have negative effect on how the people respond to the government. As a result of that, you see uprising. So there could be another thing, just like I gave an example in the case again, because of police brutality, but that eventually led to the demand for change of government. That eventually led to the demand to end corruption, to the demand for more accountability and transparency. So we might be thinking that we might be focusing on some other issues, but we do not know that it is these accumulated grievances that bottle up into violent protests, and these are being acted out in different ways. And the unfortunate thing there is that at the end of the day, the people also suffer, the businesses also suffer various degrees of losses. So it is important that we try to see how we can reduce, okay, the spate of political violence, be it ethnic religious violence, be it electoral violence, be it coup d'etat, we must reduce it. For instance, you could imagine that we have recorded a series of coup d'etat in Africa within a short period of time. So how do we reduce this? What we know for sure, certainly, is that the much more we reduce political violence, the much more businesses we grow, the much more we will, have more investors. But in as much as we continue to gloss over these fundamental issues, these problems, then we will be seeing more of protests and uprisings against the state.
Victor, thank you for that. I'm going to stop here because we've got 1 minute left. I'm going to ask each of the panelists. Javan Simpson makes the point the world is interconnected. Keith Nielsen raises the point, I'll use my words, the real problem is social media. Control social media. 20 seconds each. Victor, social media, is it the big problem here?
Social media actually is helpful because it helps to spread information about what government does, about the bad policies that affect the people, and that is why when the information goes out to the social media, you see people responding. It could be violent, but it is important that people, demonstrate and show what they feel so that the government will change.
Victor, so sorry, I've got to give you 20 seconds each. We're running out of time. Rod, 20 seconds. Social media, is that the problem here?
No.
20 seconds. Why?
Sorry?
It's not a problem. Is that
Victor,
Okay,
let Rod have a go. Victor, let Rod have a go, because I've only got running out of time. Rod, just on this point, the whole point, social media incites it. So let's not make it responsible.
So social media is something that's happening in society in general. Is our inability to focus, our inability to respond properly. It is an issue, but it's certainly not a driver. The people that are involved in the interaction are watching CNN. They're watching Newsmax. They're not all rushing to Twitter. So no, it is not. It is over. The problem with social media.
Rod, I've got to stop here because we're
overemphasized.
running out of time. And I want to get Robert in 20 seconds. Rob, I'm so sorry, running out of time. Robert, social media, was that the big influence in the United States over in the Capitol?
No, that's an old problem. The new problem is fear of exclusion by the mainstream. We're used to thinking of fear of exclusion on the part of minorities, tiny minorities perhaps, because they're so small they can't get a say. What's happening in the United States, what's happening in liberal democracies is fear of exclusion coming from the mainstream. That is, of course, going to then have some connection to social media, but that's the social media that's been going on for 10 years. We didn't have an insurrection 10 years ago. We have something new, and it's not the same old, and we got to stop fighting the last wars.
Robert, I'm going to stop here because
fear of exclusion.
Thank you very much indeed. Panel, we all want to continue. Thank you so much. That's when you know that you've been doing a good job. We didn't even get through all the questions. I'm so sorry. Fascinating. Could have gone on, and we'll definitely come back to the subject in due course. And don't forget, a copy of this webinar will be on the website tomorrow, where you can spread the word. Finally, just a few final things just to say: Kenya and Nigeria OSPAs are open, but you need to be quick. Watch out for the Economic Crime Awards and the Cyber OSPAs. They'll be opening soon. The UK OSPAs 24th, nearly a sellout. You better buy your tickets soon. Absolutely amazing response. Big black tie do at the Royal Lancaster Hotel, London. Ireland's now open. The OSPAs are on the 28th of March. Make sure you get your ticket organised. 30th of March, sorry. Make sure you get your ticket as soon as possible if you want to be at the first ever Irish OSPAs. And to say, finally, we're back next Thursday, same time. The topic is security mentoring. Does it work? We know there's the idle good scheme, but overall, is the security sector good at nurturing its future talent? Well, some of the issues brought up today, I think, will come up there. Thank you very much indeed to my panel. Thank you very much indeed to Sarah Gray in the background. And thank you to you, the audience. And let me say this final parting, as I say on the first 153, I'll say it on the 154th. Until we see you again, wherever you are in the world, stay safe.